Welcome to another episode of Thoughts to Chew On, the show where the chopping block gets fleshed out. And with Resident Evil Village coming out soon, I thought that it would be the perfect time to talk about my favorite game franchise of all time. But instead of covering a specific game, book, or movie, I decided to drink the Kool-Aid given by Dr. Skipper and join the Iceberg trend. If you don't know, the Iceberg trend is where you look at an iceberg filled with facts and trivia, with each layer ramping up in the weird, obscure, and downright probably wrong facts in regards to a specific franchise, right? But this specific iceberg was created by Retro Boy, and his channel will be linked right here and in the description below. So with all that out of the way, let's tackle the first layer. Resident Evil PS1 Trilogy. This refers to the first 3 games that were released on the PlayStation, with the first coming out in 96, the second in 98, and the third in 99. Despite the short development time between each game, only Resident Evil 1 and 2 have had multiple versions on the PlayStation. The first Resident Evil had a Director's Cut and a DualShock version of said Director's Cut. The normal Director's Cut added auto-aim, and it also came with a demo disc for Resident Evil 2. The Director's Cut also promised the uncensored version of the intro cinematic, but that was a marketing mishap. The Greatest Hits version of the Director's Cut added analog stick and rumble support, but at the cost of a weird soundtrack. Oh, the basement. But despite that, the DualShock version added Advanced Mode. Advanced Mode basically rearranged key items, changed certain camera angles, made enemies harder to kill, and it made it easier for you to die, which was a nice change of pace. If anything, you got 2 games for the price of 1, but that's soundtrack though. The second game, on the other hand, had 2 releases, the standard vanilla version and the DualShock Edition. The DualShock Edition not only added rumble and analog support, but it also added Extreme Battle Mode. Extreme Battle Mode, which was first seen in the Saturn port of the first game, finally got a spot in the limelight. It basically acted as the Mercenaries mode before the Mercenaries mode, and it plays pretty similar. You just go from point A to point B with limited ammo and lots of monsters to fight, and it's fun. Jill Sandwich. This refers to the most iconic line in Resident Evil history, a line so legendary that it will be carried into Remake. There's not really much to explain, so let me just show you these clips back to back and you'll understand.
Barry, help me please! The door won't open! Quick!
Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down. Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Wesker! Barry! Help!
Jill, you in there?
Barry? Get me out of here! The door's jammed!
Stand back! Grab my hand!
Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Really? Thanks.
Nemesis. Nemesis is probably one of the most iconic characters in the franchise. He's so popular that he was added in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 as a playable character. Nemesis is the main antagonist in Resident Evil 3, and his job is to kill the remaining members of the STARS unit. This is due to the fact that they know too much and, leave no witnesses and all that. Nemesis has some weird appearances. Not only did he make an appearance in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, he also made an appearance in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite as a playable character, Under the Skin as a cameo, a character card in SVC Card Fighters Clash 2 Expanded Edition, and a rival unit in Project X Zone or Project Cross Zone, I don't know. His appearances in the game are relegated to the third one, the remake of the third one, the remake of the third one on the Wii, a boss battle in Operation Raccoon City, and a secret boss in Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. Apparently in that game he also appears as a consequence for running out of time. Okay, stand aside, Cloud Professors. Nemesis is my new source of nightmares. Ada Wait. Ada Wait is a reference to Resident Evil 2 where Leon screams,
No.
throughout the entirety of the game without changing his inflection, which is kind of funny in a cosmic kind of way. Tank controls. Tank controls refer to the control scheme where left and right turns your character and up and down moves you forward or backwards. Basically like a tank, hence the name, right? Tank controls, in regards to Resident Evil, was the main form of movement seen throughout the majority of the series. The last Resident Evil game to use tank controls was all the way in 2008 with the release of Resident Evil 5. Personally, I enjoy tank controls, and the critics are just lame. It's pretty easy to circumvent the weird mobility issues, and it's easy to get used to overall. But what's funny to me is that the people who hate tank controls also cite Resident Evil 4 as their favorite game of all time, despite the fact that it, uses tank controls. Resident Evil Outbreak. People often scream in terror when the words Resident Evil and multiplayer are in the same sentence, but Resident Evil Outbreak did it right and is now considered a cult classic among fans of the franchise. Despite it being a spin-off though, the game, or at least one of its characters, was made canon when Alyssa Ashcroft made a cameo in Resident Evil 7. Wait, does this mean we'll get a remake of Outbreak? Probably not, but this ends the first layer. Now on to the next one. Wesker Lives. Wesker Lives could have two meanings. Either refers to the revealing code Veronica that Wesker survived the mansion incident, or the fact that a zombified Wesker makes an appearance as a mini-boss in the Sega Saturn version of the first game. We'll touch the Sega Saturn version of the game a bit later on this Iceberg, so don't worry about that. Resident Evil 3 Mercenaries. The Mercenaries is a minigame that is unlocked after beating Resident Evil 3, 4, and 5. It even got its own game on the 3DS, which is fine, not the best, but fine. But the Mercenaries had its start in the third game, and it's pretty much an endurance mode. There's a time limit, and you need to go from point A to point B without dying. And if you think that's simple, wait till you deal with every enemy in the game, but randomized, which includes an appearance from Nemesis. It's pretty fun and exhilarating, and it definitely fits the action aesthetic that the campaign had. The Fourth Survivor. After completing Leon's Scenario A and Claire's Scenario B with an A rank on either of them, you unlock the Fourth Survivor. The Fourth Survivor is the canonical minigame where you go from point A to point B, shooting zombies and monsters in order to escape Raccoon City. The story? You play as Hunk, the lone survivor of a team that was sent to retrieve the G-Virus sample from William Birkin. With the sample in hand, your mission is to make it to the chopper before Raccoon City is destroyed. It's pretty challenging to say the least, more so in the remake in my opinion. Resident Evil Code Veronica. The Dreamcast classic turned PS2 classic, Resident Evil Code Veronica is Resident Evil's first foray into the 6th generation of consoles, with 3D backgrounds to the pre-rendered ones, and Canadian representation.
Sorry about that little misunderstanding, but I thought you were another one of those
Shut up! Make one wrong move and I'll shoot!
Relax, beautiful. I said I was sorry.
There's a rumor that Resident Evil Code Veronica was meant to be Resident Evil 3, while Resident Evil 3 was supposed to be a side game. While it's understandable to think that, due to Code Veronica continuing the story with Claire going to look for her brother, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was always meant to be Resident Evil 3 due to the deal with Sony. The reason why the Dreamcast became a temporary home to Code Veronica was due to Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2 was meant to have a Sega Saturn port, but it was deemed impossible by Shinji Mikami and crew. But they set their sights on the Dreamcast, and that's how Code Veronica was born. Funny enough though, they did have a Dreamcast port of Resident Evil 2 and 3, so it kinda worked out in the end, right? Honestly, I'm not a fan of this game, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. Oh, actually, fuck the bowgun. But that ends the second layer, and now we're on to the third layer. Resident Evil Survivor. It's a bad first-person shooter, it's a bad game, it's a bad Resident Evil game, and it's a god-awful light gun game that didn't even come with a light gun in the US. But that was due to Columbine, and releasing a game with a gun at that time was really tasteless. It would have been tasteless, and overall it's a bad game, and there's not much to say about it. Not wasting my time. So next, Dino Crisis. This game is just Resident Evil but with dinosaurs. That's kind of it. Next, RE3 Epilogues. After completing Resident Evil 3, you will unlock an epilogue file. An epilogue file will give closure to all the characters from the first 3 games, but since there's 8 files in total, that means you will have to beat the game a total of 8 times, and that's pretty much it. Code Veronica was the original Resident Evil 3. I already explained this when I spoke about Code Veronica, so let's skip this one. S.D. Perry novels. The S.D. Perry novels are book adaptations of Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica, with Underworld and Caliban Cove acting as original stories. While fans enjoyed the world-building aspects that the books brought to the games, these are non-canonical to the main series, but great reads overall. Check them out if you ever get the chance. Tofu. In Resident Evil 2, after completing all 6 scenarios with an A rank, you can unlock the Tofu Survivor, which is a parody of the 4th Survivor. Despite it being basically the same mode but with a block of tofu, Tofu is only equipped with a combat knife and a couple of healing items, making this one of the hardest modes in the game. Both the Tofu Survivor and the 4th Survivor would return in the Resident Evil 2 remake, Resident Evil 1.5. In 1997, a nearly finished copy of Resident Evil 2 was created, but due to the developers not liking the game, they decided to scrap it and rework the game from the beginning. This version of Resident Evil 2 didn't have Claire Redfield but Elsa Walker, and it was supposed to be a bit more gruesome and harder than the first game. Despite it being ultimately scrapped, Elsa Walker would return as a costume in the Resident Evil 2 remake for Claire Redfield. Resident Evil 1.5 has been made playable by superfans, and it's a window to the Resident Evil 2 we never got. Sweet Home. Sweet Home is a survival horror game that was released on the Famicom and is based on the film of the same name. Resident Evil was actually supposed to be a remake to Sweet Home, but it later became its own thing, and that's pretty much it. And that ends the 3rd layer of the iceberg. Now let's jump headfirst into the 4th layer. Resident Evil Dead Aim. Resident Evil Survivor got its own spin-off series, which for some reason included Dino Stalkers, which was a spin-off to Dino Crisis. Resident Evil Dead Aim had you traverse environments with fixed camera angles, tank controls, and it was in the 3rd person, which is normal, right? But when you had to fight zombies, it would shift to a first-person view kind of thing, which means you have to constantly shift between the 1st person and the 3rd person, and that just sounds extremely nauseating, and I'm just gonna go on with my day. Resident Evil 0 was going to be on the Nintendo 64, but due to software limitations, it was moved to the GameCube. And that's pretty much it. But let me get on a bit of a tangent. Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64 is the best Nintendo 64 game of all time. It managed to fit a 2-disc game on a 64 MB cartridge without sacrificing any of the content. It even added EX files, which explained the first game to people that probably never had a PlayStation. The cutscenes, while compressed, are all there, and that's saying a lot since Spider-Man on the Nintendo 64 had its cutscenes relegated to still images. I'll make a video on this at some point, but yeah, fuck Resident Evil 0 and its lack of item boxes. Next, Devil May Cry was the original Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 had a rough development, but despite that, we got 2 amazing games, Resident Evil 4 and Devil May Cry. How'd that happen? Well, Hideki Kamiya's version of Resident Evil 4 was his action game that dropped survival horror for sick combos, and while that was shelved, Kamiya got the opportunity to rework it into Devil May Cry, which kind of explains why Dante looks like Leon in the first game. I like how Kamiya's Resident Evil 4 was shelved for being an action game when the franchise will lean on action in future installments. That ends layer 4 and it's time to enter the 5th layer. Resident Evil 1 Sega Saturn port. Despite the Sega Saturn being a pain in the ass to work with, Resident Evil somehow got a port on Sega's Misfit console. Despite it being a lesser port compared to the PlayStation version, it did manage to bring something new to the table, and that was Battle Mode. Battle Mode is the Mercenaries mode before the Mercenaries mode, but hey, Zombie Wesker, and that's kinda cool actually. I like how Resident Evil has technically had an endurance mode from the very beginning, and that's thanks to this version. So good on you, Sega Saturn. Epic victory royale, I guess. Wildstorm Comics. Like the novels, the comics adapted Resident Evil 2 and 3 with a couple of original stories to boot. The coolest thing about the Wildstorm comics is the fact that they added werewolves to the franchise, so I guess the Wildstorm comics walked so that big tall woman can run. Oh yeah, and Resident Evil Village has werewolves. I mean, this is a franchise where giant moths were something to be feared, so werewolves are not really that far from being faithful to the franchise. The Scary Door. So in Resident Evil 2, there's a storage shed with a valve and a typewriter, an odd place to have a save station, but you don't question it. You then open the door adjacent to the typewriter, relaxing as the game loads the next room, and then...
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! I'm gonna die! I'm gonna die! I'm gonna fucking die!
This is probably one of the most effective jump scares in the game, and that's because it played with your expectations. Load screens next to the save room are the only times where you can actually relax, but this jump scare dares to take you out of your comfort zone, and now you have a couple of zombies to fight. And hopefully you have some ammo left over. This actually reminds me of this scene from the first game. Overall, this is a pretty effective jump scare, and I hope you saved, I guess. Now we are halfway through this video, and before we enter the 6th layer of this iceberg, I wanted to take some time to thank those who came this far, and if you're new to the channel, like this video and subscribe to see more content. Alright, time to enter the 6th layer, Akuma in Resident Evil 2. EGM is infamous for April Fool's jokes, and one of their jokes convinced people that they could play as Akuma from Street Fighter. How was this possible? Well, you had to 1. Beat the game 6 times with an A rank, 2. Beat the game using only a handgun and knife, and 3. Typing Akuma on the computer instead of guest. If you're lucky enough to get Akuma, you will be able to unlock every door in the game and use a Godoken to insta-kill enemies. I genuinely wonder how many people actually got tricked by this, and honestly, it was probably way more than I would be comfortable knowing. The mystery door. On the second floor of the RPD, there's this red door that you can't get into, right? You could even go into it in Resident Evil 3. So what's behind this elusive door? Well, we wouldn't get that answer until Resident Evil: The Dark Side Chronicles, and it's a room we've seen before. Well, that sucks. George Romero's RE script. Legendary horror director George Romero was set to write and direct the Resident Evil film adaptation at one point, which made sense considering his work on the live-action commercial for Resident Evil 2, which was pretty cool. But due to the script being too gory and unmarketable to countries with high censorship, the script was rejected and we got the Paul My Wife Is Cool Anderson films. But Romero's work on the franchise was revived post-mortem when the Resident Evil 2 remake got a live-action commercial of its own, so that's cool. Resident Evil Gaiden. Resident Evil Gaiden is a second attempt at bringing Resident Evil to handheld consoles. The first being a Game Boy version of the first Resident Evil, but due to software issues it was cancelled. So instead of poorly emulating the PS1 classic, M4, the developers of Gaiden, decided to dead aim the game by combining Sweet Home-esque environment design with the combat being relegated to a whack-a-mole kind of thing. On the bright side, the music was cool, the art was amazing, and it tried something new, and it kind of fails at it, but you can see a good game buried under the weird gameplay. With that, this ends the 6th layer. Time to enter the 7th layer. Biohazard Dash. Biohazard Dash, or Resident Evil 1.25, is another build of a possible sequel to the first game. Taking place years after the first game, you will go back and explore the remains of the Spencer Mansion and fight some kind of plant zombies? The Spencer Mansion was blown to smithereens. There was no way that there would have been something to explore. But the plant zombies will be seen in Resident Evil 2 and the Resident Evil 2 remake with the IVs. RE3 Skyface. Apparently at some points in Resident Evil 3 you can see a face in the sky. Either this is completely fake or a blinking you'll miss a moment. Well, that's pretty much it. Next, Leon was based on a pet dog. So apparently Leon's facial expressions and eyes were based on Shinji Mikami's pet bloodhound. Okay. Every monster in Resident Evil 1 is from a specific movie. Apparently each monster is based on some sort of movie reference. The zombies are from Dawn of the Dead, the dogs are from Cujo, the crows are from the birds, the hunters are from the Watchers, the spiders are from Tarantula, Neptune is from Jaws, the wasp are from the Swarm, the chimeras are from the Fly remake, the Crimson Heads are from 28 Days Later, Lisa Trevor is from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Yawn is from the Rattlers, Plan 42 is from Little Shop of Horror, and the Tyrant is an amalgamation of Frankenstein and the Terminator. Now we're on to Layer 8. Let's do this. Shinji Mikami knew. While Resident Evil's shift into action was a surprise to most, apparently Shinji Mikami knew this entire time. Apparently this is the reason why he made Dino Crisis, which combined horror and action, but then again Resident Evil 3 kinda combines horror and action, so maybe he did know, maybe he didn't, I guess, I don't know. Lisa Trevor was based on a real person. Lisa Trevor is the breakout character from the Resident Evil remake, and her tragic story was apparently based on real-life experiments done to people during World War II and experiments conducted by B.F. Skinner. I personally don't feel comfortable talking about this, so if you're interested in this, like, just search it up on your own time. Overall, she's a very tragic character, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. Predictive programming. In the 90s, the zombie genre was pretty much dead, but when Resident Evil was released, it basically revived the zombie genre, and it's been said that the zombies from 28 Days Later was inspired by Resident Evil, because instead of the dead rising from their graves, the zombies were created by a virus, like in Resident Evil. An interesting theory, but that's the last thing I expected from predictive programming. We are now entering the final layer. Lost Resident Evil fan films from the 90s. Resident Evil fans made low-budget Resident Evil films that were shown around at conventions. Most are lost to time, and apparently they were somewhat decent despite being low budget. That's pretty much it. Next, every copy of Resident Evil 3 is personalized. This is a lie. Each disc is the same, and that's about it. But this ends this Iceberg, and wow, it was pretty cool and interesting. Once again, I want to give special thanks to Retro Boy for creating this Iceberg and for helping me out when I had any questions. And yeah, check out his channel, it will be linked right here and in the description below. I'd like to thank my patrons, Leocrit and Hachi, for supporting the channel, and for $1 a month, your name will show up right here. Love you guys, and shamalamoomoo.